If just a few other mutations accounted for the remaining 30% of cystic fibrosis cases, then general population screening for CF carriers would not be impractical. But most of the other causative mutations occur in just a single family line, and more than 1,000 different CF-causing mutations have been discovered to date. What does this mean for population screening? In practice, any test could screen for at most 25 different mutations. But those 25 most common forms would still account for only about 85% of all cases. As a result, we'd be missing about 1 in 6 mutations, not a very good batting average for a diagnostic. Now, say we have a couple, both of whom have tested negative for CF mutations according to our highly imperfect screen. We could hardly tell them with any confidence that there was no danger of their producing a child with cystic fibrosis. Why bother, the argument goes, with an inconclusive test that typically costs $300? But despite the technical difficulties, prenatal screening for cystic fibrosis can still identify a large proportion of all affected fetuses. Why isn't it more widely adopted? Paradoxically, cystic fibrosis advocacy groups have played a major part in limiting CF testing to families already affected. Broader testing, it is feared, would divert limited resources away from the ultimate goal of finding a cure. That concern is understandable, particularly at this moment. An estimated 30,000 Americans have cystic fibrosis. Treatment advances have already extended life expectancies considerably, and it is conceivable that a cure will be in hand before long. Having said that, it would be irresponsible to suggest that a cure is around the corner. Babies born today with cystic fibrosis still face the prospect of a lifelong struggle against a debilitating disease. Though curing cystic fibrosis is definitely a top priority, there should still be room to permit an expectant mother to have access, if she wants, to testing. Then, fully informed about the status of her fetus, she has the freedom to make whatever choices she sees fit. Broader testing is also resisted for less material reasons. There are those who view screening as an admission of defeat, the wrong manner of solution. Advocacy groups are in the business of ensuring that people with the disease feel that they belong to a community and are valued by society. How does one reconcile that mission with testing, which, to put it in bluntest possible terms, is promoting the abortion of affected fetuses? Cystic fibrosis advocates are anxious that people with CF do not become stigmatized, and they worry that, indirectly, testing does just that. In fact, there's an unfortunate precedent in the history of genetic testing that haunts all patient advocacy groups. Long before the advent of DNA screening, one of the earliest diagnostics for a genetic disease was developed to detect sickle cell anemia, which in the United States affects primarily African Americans. As we saw in Chapter 3, those with 2 copies of the mutated sickle hemoglobin gene will suffer painful, debilitating symptoms, while those with only a single copy, carriers, will notice little effect. Following the development of simple blood tests in the 1960s, screening programs were hastily established across the country. Despite the best of intentions, they did more harm than good. Screeners generally fail to counsel test subjects properly as to the significance of the test or its results. Many diagnosed as carriers mistakenly assumed that they themselves had the disease. Some were even denied jobs or health insurance on the basis of the test. And couples who were at risk of producing sickle cell children were advised rather heavy-handedly to think twice. The tests, some programs were mandatory, were coercive in effect, suggesting to some that the United States was entering a renaissance of racist eugenics, stigmatizing all who tested positive. The sad irony is that from a purely medical point of view, the campaign was in fact sensibly conceived. Despite advances in treatment, sickle cell anemia remains a chronic, painful condition. Screening is the best remedy for a disease that is far more easily avoided than confronted. But the first mechanisms designed to eradicate it were so badly managed as to have rightly angered many intended beneficiaries. Fortunately, in 1972, new federal guidelines redesigned the sickle cell screening program, allowing it to be effective without the widespread concern raised by the initial effort. Harder to repair has been the trust of advocacy groups for genetic diseases in general. The experience of the community of those affected by sickle cell disease has left them ever leery of screening programs, and the fear of stigma persists, sometimes, alas, at the expense of better public health. In so many ways, genetic testing, despite its incontrovertible usefulness, proves to be flypaper for controversy. Randy Hagerman, then at Denver Children's Hospital, decided to apply a DNA test for Fragile X to children in special education classes in Denver. The reasoning was simple. Children whose learning was impaired by that disorder would be better served if they were identified, whereupon their schooling could be tailored to their particular needs. Of 439 students tested, 5 with Fragile X mutations were discovered. A more extensive survey of schools in Holland had found 11 previously undiagnosed cases of Fragile X in a group of 1,531 students. Perhaps the most interesting part of the Denver study was the response of the parents and guardians to Hagerman's offer. Most recognized the benefit of a diagnosis, both for the potential to improve their child's education and for the identification of the presence of the disorder in the family line. But fully a third refused the test, citing either a certainty that their children did not have Fragile X or a concern that their children might find the test too stressful. Hagerman has been criticized for her efforts. It was a field day for those who insist upon seeing the menace of a totalitarian genetic future in every attempt at harnessing DNA to address a social problem. The issue is indeed social as well as personal. The high incidence of the Fragile X permutation, it is on perhaps as many as 1 in 200 X chromosomes, may warrant population screening. In the United States, it is estimated that just one reasonably severe case will cost, over a lifetime of non-work and institutionalization, some $2 million in current dollar value. The ever-increasing challenge of providing affordable health care should itself suggest a potent argument for giving every mother the opportunity to be tested. The logic of hard realities is not lost on smaller countries, where the margins for policy error are not as great. A pilot study in Israel screened 14,334 women. 207 were found to have a permutation. Prenatal diagnosis was made available upon request, identifying 5 fetuses with extended CGG repeats. The fate of those pregnancies was rightly the choice of the expectant mother. A free society should no more require a woman to abort a fetus with a genetic disorder than it should require her to carry it to term.